But the counter argument to my thought right there is, what about Illinois? What about Illinois? Ohio State smothered Illinois 34-16, just like they've smothered everyone else. Did I miss the part where Julian Sayin needed a game-winning drive to make up for his late interception in Illinois? Did I miss that? That didn't happen. Hey, it's Juck. At number one, the most beautiful uniform in all of sport. If they brought back the gray stripes, this thing is so far out in front of everybody, you can't touch it. We are not bemoaning the noon kickoff. We are now owning it. It's a badge of honor. We're the lunatic fringe that defines our coach's legacy when it comes to this game. They don't get to define that outside the family. We're cut from a different cloth for Ohioans. Do I want Michigan to beat Oklahoma? No way in hell. I don't know what world I'm living in. This is insane to me. And if you saw my outburst, I apologize. It's showtime now. And welcome to Juck on Bucks on a Monday. Appreciate you so much for joining me. Week 11 of college football wasn't super exciting, and I think that includes the Ohio State game, which finished 34-10 at Purdue. The Buckeyes don't cover for the first time of the year in a game that just, even for a game where you like to see, and I love to see games where you get the young guys in, it just didn't provide a whole lot of excitement. What it did provide was some opportunities to get better, some developments. One of the bigger developments, I think, Zion Grady, and that was one of our 5 questions coming into the week. Would we potentially see Zion Grady, a guy that I think the Buckeyes are going to be counting on to hopefully step into a starting role next year, regardless of whether or not Kenyatta Jackson goes to the NFL? I think that you're relying on Zion Grady to be that dude. And Zion Grady, who's been getting, 8 snaps, 9 snaps, 12 snaps, would we potentially see him kind of step into a bit of a bigger role and maybe start eating into Bo Atkinson's snaps. Bo Atkinson, the transfer from North Carolina, who's come in and, played tough, played hard, but he's probably not the guy that you were hoping he was going to be athletically. And, to be quite honest, if we're just kind of looking at statistics and grading scales and things like that, it's not been so good. He's got 3 tackles on the year, 4 missed tackles, and for instance, a PFF grade was lowest on the team in the game against Purdue, and it's been consistently pretty low compared to the rest of the defenders on the team. Well, Zion Grady, the prior game against Penn State, had only played 2 snaps, which was kind of confusing because it seemed to me like he should be stepping into a bigger role because he's been playing good every time he's in. Against Purdue, we got the snap counts, and he was well up over Bo Atkinson's 9 snaps, as Grady had 15. And I think we're going to start to see him maybe rolling into the bigger role there between the two and taking on a little more and a little more. And he looked good in the game as well. So some opportunity, some development there. And we had plenty more that we discussed in that post-game show. But one of the games I was looking forward to personally was Indiana going into Penn State. And I was looking forward to this game because there is part of me that is either one of the two things, hoping or thinking that there is still a decent possibility here, despite Indiana winning out at Autzen, that there still may be a pretty big discrepancy between their trench play and the trench play of a program that recruits at a very high level, like a Penn State, like an Ohio State, like a Bama, Georgia, that when we see them match up with a program like that, with those kind of athletes up front, that we will potentially see them get exposed. And Indiana went into Happy Valley flying high. Penn State, we heard a report earlier on in the week that the beat reporters got to view practice, and they said it was the lowest energy practice they had seen, which to me just seemed kind of on par with kind of the effort we saw in the second half at Ohio State from them. When they realized they were beaten, they just kind of felt like they gave up. And that's unfortunate. Obviously, it would be an unfortunate situation to be in as a college football player for this to happen to your season, particularly if you are an older guy and a leader. And it was pretty clear early on that Penn State was there to play. They were there to play, and they were there to play at Ohio Stadium. And if they kept it close, maybe they would have kept that effort up and things would have been different. But they were able to keep it close against Indiana. Ethan Grunkemeyer, the kid from Olentangy, in his second start, completed more passes for a higher percentage and threw for more yards than Fernando Mendoza. Also, the same amount of touchdowns won and interceptions won as Fernando Mendoza. He had a better statistical line than Mendoza, a kid making his second ever start. All in all, Penn State had 336 yards to Indiana's 326. Both teams had 5 penalties. Penn State had 1 extra turnover. I mean, statistically, when you look down the line at the team stats between these two, this game was dead even, man. It was dead even. But, of course, Mendoza takes him down on a game-winning drive. Mendoza madness has absolutely swept the country, and it is insane. It's insane. Fernando Mendoza and the Hoosiers rolled into Penn State as a 14.5-point favorite, up 20-17 in that fourth quarter. Indiana's golden boy threw an interception to Penn State that Penn State turned into a touchdown, and it was a 24-20 lead at that point, and the score remained that way until Indiana took over with 1:15 left. Mendoza then led Indiana down the field on a game-winning drive that started with a sack, culminated in a ridiculous touchdown catch by Omar Cooper that led to one of the most obnoxiously performative calls of Gus Johnson's career. And that is saying something, my man. And I saw people talking about how much they love this call because it showed emotion. If you hear that call from that guy and you don't think that that dude wanted to make himself part of that moment, and honestly, based on what he said recently about being part of Michigan's run and resurgence, by being a part of that and having his voice on those things, he absolutely wants to attach that call to that moment. And the performative nature, how hard he leaned into it, was just eye-rolling. Like I had a hard time prying my eyeballs back. It was ridiculous. And my initial reaction to the finish of that game was somewhat relief because of two things. Number one, I think it proved my point. I think it proved my point about the trenches and about Indiana. It proved my theory. They got a problem. They have a problem, and they are not nearly the team that they are when they go against a program that has lines of scrimmage play like Penn State. They're just not. They're in for it big time against Ohio State. They got trouble coming. There's no doubt about that in my mind. But what I want is the opportunity to prove that. So I wanted Penn State to win because I want that to be proved in this potential hypothetical matchup we've been speaking about for a while now. Number 1 versus number 2 in the country in the Big Ten championship game, in a game that would be the de facto Heisman championship game, right? The Heisman championship game between the two top contenders, Julian Sayin, Fernando Mendoza, as they have emerged as the two odds-on favorites for several weeks now. And for this incredible potential scenario to happen, I didn't want to know what the tiebreakers were. I just wanted Penn State to play them close, see if I was right about the line of scrimmage play, and for Indiana to come out with the win. So my reaction to the game initially was relief. Now, I was working, and I was on the post-game show with Mark Givler. Then I recorded my post-game show, and probably 3 hours had passed since I had checked any social media because I was just recording, writing notes, recording. And then when I got on to check social media, to the websites, to check around outside of TV, I hadn't heard from anything else. I was stunned, man. I was absolutely stunned at the reaction that the country had to my relief that Indiana won that game. The country's reaction was give him the Heisman. Mendoza's game-winning drive was his Heisman moment, and apparently this thing isn't going to get to my Heisman championship game because it's shut down. It's over. College football discourse is really frustrating to be a part of. It's frustrating to be a part of because it is hyperbolic and it's reactionary, and that can be some of the fun of it, as I myself am hyperbolic and reactionary at times too. So I'm kind of conditioned for this type of thing, but this reaction almost felt even different by college football standards. And I'll give you an example from a guy that we can always count on to give the anti-Ohio State stance, and that's Cincinnati Stu. I bring him up all the time because it never fails. Whenever there's a situation where Ohio State is potentially involved, he takes the opposite end. So I go looking and go find, all right, what does Stuart Mandel of The Athletic have to say about it? Because Cincinnati Stu is going to prove my point. So I went and found what Cincinnati Stu had to say about this game, Indiana at Penn State. Spending most of the last century finding inexplicable ways to lose, Indiana is suddenly incapable of losing. Now, finding most of the last century finding inexplicable ways to lose. Inexplicable ways to lose is how we would characterize Penn State under James Franklin. A really good team that somehow always found a way to lose. Indiana has just sucked for 100 years. That's very, very different, Stu. Even on the road and shorthanded, down 4 points with 1:30 left and no timeouts, facing 2nd and 17 from its own 13-yard line after its star quarterback was sacked to start the drive, a seemingly broken Penn State team rising and knocking off an unbeaten Indiana team looked imminent. But that's not how things work anymore, not in 2025. Indiana is the one that gets the break. Indiana is the one that gets to break Penn State's heart. The aforementioned quarterback, Fernando Mendoza, got up from getting sacked and promptly led his team 87 yards entirely through the air down the field. He got help from tight end Charlie Becker in his acrobatic sideline catch, and most notably, receiver Omar Cooper Jr., whose epic toe-grazing back of the end zone touchdown helped deliver the 27-24 Hoosiers victory. Epic, hyperbolic, as if Indiana just won some really big game. Except they didn't. They didn't win a big game. Now, this would have been a big game. I don't know. Week 4? It wasn't a big game at all. In fact, it was a team they were a 2-touchdown plus favorite over. They were a 14.5-point favorite. A 14.5-point favorite, and they're waxing poetically like this was some huge accomplishment. A team that lost to Northwestern on that field this year, a team that lost to UCLA, a Penn State team that Mendoza's biggest competitor just surgically dispatched exactly 1 week ago in Julian Sayin en route to a blowout Ohio State win. Absolutely torched them. Has everyone lost their flipping mind here? Indiana, I'm not knocking for having to come back and beat Penn State. I'm talking about the reaction to that win. There's nothing wrong with having a game or two in a really good season, a long season by a good quality team where a game is closer than it should have been. Look, we know the ropes here. We've seen a lot of Ohio State very good teams that go 11-1 or 12-0 that have a few games during the year that are closer than you would ever expect. Take Nebraska, for instance, last year. That never should have been close, but you gut it out and you win it. However, I recall Will Howard leading Ohio State on a drive to win that game against Nebraska. I don't remember hearing anything other than Ohio State almost lost to Nebraska. That's all you heard. There was no pat on the back for a job well done for coming back and winning that game. This is amazing. This reaction is insane. And again, I don't knock them at all for being close. And it was a gritty, cut it out win. That's fantastic. But the way it's being described, this comeback being talked about, as if they beat a top 10 team on the road against a 3-6 Penn State team, and somehow what Mendoza did, making up for his own costly interception that set up the Penn State go-ahead touchdown. It's bizarre, man. How is that more impressive than Julian Sayin's 20 for 23 performance for 316 yards and 4 touchdowns in a 38-14 victory against the same team? Mendoza was 19 for 30 for 218 yards, 1 touchdown and 1 pick against Penn State. Now, there is no doubt that Sayin played a better game against this underperforming Penn State team. And they still have all the defensive talent that they did when they were a top 3 team. That's true. Mendoza's drive was awesome. The drive to win it was awesome. He showed all the throws. He showed the calm. He showed the poise. His receivers showed they're very talented, and he did it without his best receiver. All of that's very impressive. on a single drive against a team that you're a 14-point favorite over, and a team that you just gave the ball in an interception and gift wrapped in their own field, their side of the field, and they scored a touchdown to take the lead. Like what Julian Sayin did, much more impressive against them, no doubt. But the counter argument to my thought right there is, what about Illinois? What about Illinois? Ohio State smothered Illinois 34-16, just like they've smothered everyone else. Did I miss the part where Julian Sayin needed a game-winning drive to make up for his late interception in Illinois? Did I miss that? That didn't happen. Julian Sayin hasn't put himself in position to have to do that once through 9 games as a redshirt freshman. Mendoza, his second year as a starting quarterback. But the truth is, comparing like opponents is a silly exercise to begin with. I'm not comparing Julian Sayin to Penn State. I'm only saying that because people are acting like this performance that Mendoza had against Penn State was something that should crown him the Heisman. Well, then now you got to bring it up. And if you're going to bring up Illinois, listen, a 38-16 victory that Ohio State had against Illinois, that's an Ohio State 2025 blowout. That is an Ohio State blowout. That is the version of the Indiana 56-3 blowout. That's how Ohio State is blowing out teams this year, running very low plays, getting their score, and squashing people with limited possessions, 8 possessions, sometimes 9 if we're really lucky. And that's how they've done it. That's just what it is. That's a blowout to this Ohio State team. Absolutely. They were in control that entire time and dominated that Illinois game. No doubt about that. In college football, the reason I don't like comparing like opponents is because teams are wildly different. We're dealing with teenagers, and from week to week, you don't ever get the same team for most teams. In fact, this is what separates right here the absolute best of the best. The best of the best consistently give you the same product every week, unless it's a crap product. They give you a consistently good product, and they are able to motivate themselves and perform and bring it every week. Something that we consistently praise Ryan Day about for being able to get the Ohio State Buckeyes up for crappy teams week after week after week. And you never see him lay an egg. You never see him go out to Purdue and all of a sudden find yourself in a game midway through the third quarter. It never happens. And Julian Sayin has never been in the situation where he has been able to showcase the ability. Matter of fact, we saw him on a 2-minute drive before halftime with 45 seconds. It looked sensational. I feel like it's the only time we've seen him execute that. We've not even gotten to see it. But loudly pronouncing, it's over, give him the Heisman, about a quarterback who bailed his team out against a 3-6 team, particularly when the top 4 competitors for the award, Fernando Mendoza, Julian Sayin, Marcel Reed of Texas A&M, also undefeated, the number 3 team in the country, Ty Simpson of Alabama. All of these quarterbacks, top 4 teams in the country, each one of them are likely to not just play a really interesting, challenging game in rivalry week, but each of them also likely to play in their conference championship, matched up against each other. So if you are someone, as we can clearly see, Texas A&M and Alabama meeting in the SEC championship, and Ohio State and Indiana meeting in the Big Ten championship, those games take place 2 days before Heisman ballots are due. And if you are someone knowing that those games are likely to happen and you vote early, you vote before those games happen, before rivalry week happens, for Fernando Mendoza for a comeback that he put his team in the position to have to come back against a 3-6 team, like, you're a joke, man. You're an absolute joke. That isn't what this is about. But make no mistake, to the Buckeye fans who are rooting for Julian Sayin to at least have a shot here, this was powerful. The reaction to this thing was powerful because there are a lot of Heisman voters who wait every year for this to happen. They wait for the college football public and talking heads to coalesce behind a moment, and that's it. That's their guy. And these are powerful moments in a Heisman race, and very few times do we see them quite that immediate and loud and universally accepted. It was literally everybody on one side and Ohio State on the other side. And well, we're used to that. We're used to that, man. In addition to that, Julian Sayin has a teammate in Jeremiah Smith, as these votes are still very regional, likely to peel off some votes that would have potentially gone to Julian. And as ridiculous as that sounds, this was a bad development for his Heisman candidacy. It really was. It was a bad development. In addition to that, it's clear that these people are suffering from Ohio State fatigue. The Buckeyes are not a blue blood. The Buckeyes are the blue blood. The Buckeyes are the most hated and the most loved program in the sport. They're the Yankees, the Cowboys, the Buckeyes. That's what it is. We all know it. And they were really looking forward to this year, because what you had was Ohio State winning the national championship last year, which of course they hated, but the rest of college football, knowing what was going to happen with that senior-laden crew, was expecting a young, struggling, somewhat team in 2025 that, yeah, they might make the playoffs. They're Ohio State. They might win a game. They're Ohio State. They're not a national championship contending Ohio State. And they felt like we feel when we see Alabama out here losing to FSU, and all of a sudden, here they are right back in it. They just don't go away, man. It's so obnoxious. That's how you feel about Bama. That's how the whole world that follows college football feels about us every year. And here we are, more than halfway through the season, and they're reluctantly now hearing everybody admit, all right, the Buckeyes are the clear number one. So much so that Will Compton, Taylor Lewan's partner on Bustin' with His Boys, those dudes, Compton comes on and he give it to Mendoza. Give it to Mendoza. And then he says, Ohio State is natty or bust. They're trying to saddle this team with the natty or bust now. And that's something. Had not heard that one before until this weekend. And that's starting to spread too. It's natty or bust for this incredibly young football team after they just won the national championship and a bunch of players left. And they came into this season not as the number one odds-on favorite to win the national championship. It was all jumped up at the top, jumbled up, four or five teams. And all of a sudden, this team has to wear a natty or bust label? I don't think so, pal. That is not the way that works. Not the way at all. But Ohio State winning a national championship is absolutely a nightmare for parity, and it's a nightmare for the end of the super team dialogue. It is a nightmare for fun for them, and they desperately want to see someone knock us off. Now, the problem that they have, and the bad news that I got for them, is Indiana has been exposed up front. What Penn State was able to do to them up front is exactly what Ohio State will be able to do to them, only considerably worse. Considerably worse, because Ohio State has Matt Patricia and a way better collection of dudes on the defense behind those guys up front, and they're in big trouble. They won't touch Ohio State in the Big Ten championship. This is going to be a bloodbath. Ohio State, the clear number one. In fact, I would now have Texas A&M number two, and I wouldn't be surprised if the committee felt the same way, which kind of goes to show you just how valuable Mendoza's comeback was. They were going to make the playoffs anyway. This did nothing to boost that for them or take them out of it. All it did was expose them. They got exposed at Penn State. And I cannot stand the Indiana fan base. They are a bunch of people who just walked into college football, or they were Notre Dame fans and they're just kind of climbing on Indiana now. And they are the least knowledgeable, most obnoxious, most arrogant, but somehow also have a inferiority complex people I've ever run across. Can't stand them. They're not on my team. Forget all that Big Ten BS with me. Those folks, I can't stand them. They're the enemy, and they're going to get it. And I can't wait.